Welcome to the 16th episode of Timely Topics. I'm your host, Roy McGloin, and I'm excited to be joined by my very bright co-host, Jen Matthew.
Hello.
In this episode, Jen and I dive into the impact that culture has in the workplace, particularly how we can create culture, sustain culture, and whether or not we can change culture when we feel it's moving the wrong direction. We also highlight some of the great work being done in and around Hartford in the hospitality space, and as always, the episode wraps up with our good idea, bad idea segment. You ready?
Let's do this.
Welcome to the Timely Topics Show, where we're bringing you all the buzz and banter of today's business conversations. Straight from our studios in downtown Hartford, with your hosts, Rory McGloin and Jennifer Matthew.
So Jen, as our listeners have got the chance to learn about you, you love to travel, and I want to kick things off today by having a conversation about some upcoming trips you have planned.
So I'm going to Scotland in May, and as you know, I approached you and said, hey, going to Scotland, really excited about it. Have you ever been? Do you have any recommendations? And you said, wait a second. You're flying from here to Scotland and you're skipping over Ireland? Like, we've been friends for 10 years and you're not going to go visit Ireland. So I rearranged my travel schedule.
That's what I do.
And I'm taking a flight from Bradley to Dublin.
Yep.
And I'm going to spend some time there. And then we're taking a trip up to Belfast and doing the northern coast.
Yep.
And then we're heading over to Edinburgh and doing Scotland.
That's good.
So thank you for the recommendation. I'm actually really excited to have a moment to stop, get some experiences that I've always wanted to, and then I'm going to have to hit you up because I think in another year or two, we'll probably go back and try to do like the whole tour of Ireland.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, on behalf of all the people in Northern Ireland, we're very excited for you to go and to take that trip. I think for many years, like a lot of folks that would have come over from the States would have gone to Dublin and gone south, which is fine. There's so many great sights and scenes down there as well. But it'll be exciting for you to go up north, and it's a place that means a lot to me. So I'm excited to have you come back and be able to share some stories on that too.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, looking at pictures of Ireland and Scotland, I've been following a lot of different blogs and things, and going on social and looking at some stuff. I am so excited. It just looks absolutely beautiful and peaceful, and that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think you're going to find that you'll see this intersection, right? You know, Dublin has become a metropolis of Western Europe, and it's a melting pot in its own way and shape and form. And so when you land, and if you spend any time in the city, you'll notice that. And then you'll head up north to Belfast, and you'll have, again, right, you're going to see, you know, parts of modern Northern Ireland coming together with all of its, you know, old world charm, right? And the things that you probably have associated with the expectations that you have, some really great old pubs, some amazing landscapes and vistas, and the familiarity and the friendliness, the welcome of the people, you know, really stands out in such a special way. And our episode today is all about culture. Yeah. So have you thought a little bit about something that you're anticipating, or the mental models that you have heading to Ireland, heading to Scotland? Like, what are you expecting? I'm curious to hear about your expectations.
That's so interesting. I picked these locations specifically because I wanted a little bit slower of a pace. Instead of, I spent a good amount of time in Italy last summer, which was super fast paced, bumping all around. And I was really tired. When I got home, I said to you, I need a vacation from my vacation. And I was looking for something a little bit more laid back. I even said, I want to pack lighter. I don't want to bring a lot of luggage. I don't want to have to necessarily bring 10 different types of clothing going out versus, and I just want to be casual and have fun. So my expectation is that it's laid back, that there's some levels of peace, adventure, trying new things. I don't know. Does that align with?
Yeah, I think it really does. I think for me, in my experiences of all the years going back and forth, there is absolutely a change of pace. I mean, we live on the East Coast of America, which oftentimes feels like we're running just at a different race.
Gosh, yeah.
So for sure, getting over to Ireland for me, as often as I did during the summers, you had to change your clock. You had to change your expectations. With that being said, though, we've seen a huge change in the culture over there in the last 10 years. I mean, it's westernized, beyond our probably wildest imaginations as kids growing up in the culture scene of what it is today. Nevertheless, though, when you leave the city and you head off into some of the rural areas, you're going to find that it is slow. And one of the things I always try to tell people, especially as you're spending time in parts of Northern Ireland, is if you look at the writers the poets, look at the actors and the actresses coming out of the island right now. Like, look at the impact the small little island is having on the world and the way that it's shaping our opinions, especially in pop culture. The musicians that you can think of that are coming out of there. There should be times and opportunities for you to go and take your notepad and go out and sit and look into the sunset and capture your notes and thoughts, because I know that's what you're looking for. And I do think that it will provide that sense of peace and reflection and opportunity to kind of take a step back and think about what's important to me, right? Why am I here? What am I doing? And I don't think it's by accident that some of these amazing writers and poets over the years, right, for the last several centuries have come out of this space, because it just kind of evokes that visceral type of reaction out of you.
Yeah, I love the idea of being inspired. And you know what I'm also inspired by? Food.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part of travel, is just experiencing great restaurants.
And you love potatoes.
Yes.
And let's call it like it is. You're going to a place where they make potatoes and they're really, really good at it. And you can have
shout out.
You can have as many different varieties and types as you can. In fact,
Bring them all.
One of the things that's very, part of our culture, on an episode about culture, but during, celebrations and holidays and religious celebrations, like one of the things that is synonymous is that on the table there will be like at least 5 different types of potatoes made, right? So when you go in, you can go in and try them all. You'll love it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely not upset about that.
Yeah, and the food's fresh. Obviously, going to Europe, everything's coming from a lot closer, so you'll just notice instantly that all the food feels fresh, and it comes within from miles down the road, and that obviously changes the entire experience in your culinary journey too.
Yeah, and I know that we talk a lot about traveling locally, or kind of experiencing the flavors and the spaces that we live in, and we have some amazing places around us here, even in Connecticut and Hartford, and we've been doing some traveling around the state together separately at various restaurants and spaces, and I had the chance to try a new restaurant that I really liked in West Hartford, the Laurel. Have you been?
Nope.
Amazing food. So huge shout out. And I think that was such a fun new addition to West Hartford. Always looking for great restaurants. Have you been or tried anything new recently?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of really cool stuff going on. For those of our listeners who are following along on LinkedIn or maybe Instagram journey, the Build Hartford course has really picked up steam here in the last 3 semesters, and particularly this year. Huge shout out to so many partners that have really helped for our program here at CCI to allow the students and myself to get direct exposure and experiences going into all sorts of restaurants, stage companies, entertainment venues. So I feel like I've been on tour for like the last 4 weeks around Hartford, going out and meeting great characters, going into the spaces that we look forward to going, and starting to appreciate what we can do here as a center to be able to bring them value and to be able to share their stories. So in fact, our next episode is going to be an interview with the executive chef from the Foundry, Jeff Zott, and one of the things that we had a chance to do earlier in the week was myself and a friend of mine got a chance to go in and check out the Foundry for the first time. And the space is amazing. It's unlike anything that we have in Hartford. So you're going to love it. You walk in, and it was actually a great time to walk in. We walked in around 5:30, 6 o'clock, and it's May right now. And so the sun was just starting to set a little bit, and it was gorgeous. Food, great. Service, great. Excellent. Just kind of an atmosphere that we've been really longing for and looking for. And so I'm really excited to interview Jeff and have him share his story about his vision for where that's going to take us.
Yeah, and what I love so much about restaurants is the experience to try the food, but to also feel the feeling, that culture that's invoked by the person that is curating that experience for us. And I love to cook. I love to have people over my house and create that experience. But going to these environments where these are professionals that have come and gone from different restaurants, have grown up in this space, like that's amazing. That's part of the reason why we're having Jeff on, right? Is to learn about that.
Yeah, it's kind of tied all together. Going back to your upcoming trip, I think one of the things that we were talking about as you got ready is like one of the things that we love about traveling is that there has to be a certain sense of almost conformity. You're going to walk in to the culture and say, what do you got, right? Like what is the norm here, and how should I behave, and how do we eat, and what's the order, and what's the kind of orchestra of the whole thing.
And what time, and right, because that's so different depending upon where you travel.
And I think one of the things that we were saying as we bring it back locally is like, what if we bring that travel mentality right back to our neighborhoods, right? To go show up to the spaces, and instead of going in with almost an expectation of like, this is what I want, this is what I need.
Yeah.
What is that restaurant trying to provide? And so I got to give a couple shout outs here, because like we've had so many great partners, and the Build Hartford course has provided a vehicle for some of these relationships to build, if you will, pun intended. We were down at Parkville a couple weeks ago, right? So if you guys haven't been to Parkville Market, it's just this amazing kind of culmination of so many ethnicities and bringing their foods together, and they celebrate all of them. And one of the things that was so cool is like you walk in and you can have just this wide variety of food.
Yeah, you can have anything.
Matt Sousa was our host there. Shout out to Matt for taking good care of us. But you like walk in and you talk about just like you're almost overwhelmed with selection and choice, and so you really could go and spend multiple days having that. And then just one other shout out that I have to give because it was such a impactful guest lecture for us was Scott Dolch was in from the Connecticut Restaurant Association. So when we talk about restaurants, and we're going to get into this a little bit more later on in the interview with Jeff, it's just restaurants are trying to curate an experience, and we love thinking about like how do you take your values, how do you take your purpose, and then how do you manifest it in some way. And Scott said this, he offered this insight for the students, and he said in the restaurant industry, every impression is a first impression. And I love that because my passion for communication, I think about that, like every impression is a first impression. And so in a restaurant, right, they're constantly trying to create that experience. And so I'm looking forward for your recap when you come back home from your trip and what stood out and what you liked and where it aligns with things, having been familiar with the culture and what stands out as being different will be cool.
Yeah, and we've talked about when we read the book Unreasonable Hospitality last year and everything with intention. So you walk into a restaurant, and I love when things are properly curated. It's not even just the food, it's the entire experience. The way someone greets you and comes over to you, the way that they ask you what type of water that you want to consume, or how they present the specials and what the menus look like, and even like the table setting, the lighting, the mood, the experience. It really transforms. Like you go to these experiences because you want to do something outside of yourself, outside of the space that you're normally in, and usually you're bringing people with you because you want to have great conversations. And I love that whole space. I love what you're doing with Build. I think the partnerships are amazing. Giving our students the opportunity to have access to these people, they're geniuses in this industry, in the space, and we're so lucky to have so many of them in Connecticut. I mean, if you think about, we really are a food capital in the state, and I know we talk about pizza a lot, but really like Hartford, Mystic, New Haven, Stamford, like these are really great hubs of food and entertainment. And I love that we're able to leverage that with this course.
It is really cool. A couple tips before you go on your trip, just for everybody that's going. A couple things. When you head up to Northern Ireland in particular, they love to hear your story. So don't be afraid when you sit down at the counter at the place. Tell them why you're there. Tell them that you're excited to be there. I think they're really excited for folks to come and visit, and they love welcoming. Particularly, they love welcoming the Americans and the Canadians that go over because they feel like they have this connection. So lean into it, right? Okay. Enjoy it. There's some cultures that you go to and you try to kind of engage that and may not be their fit.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll totally be into it. And I always say, if you're having like a really authentic Irish experience, a lot of times what happens is like you'll meet somebody along your journey and they'll want to show you something. They'll want to bring you somewhere. They'll want to give you something. Okay. Let them. That's their way of kind of welcoming you in and giving you something to take. And then the last thing I always say is like there's a nature and a tendency in those kind of Celtic cultures, even heading to Scotland, like they're going to want to provide you something. So a little tip that I have, and I have made this a thing now for our family when we go somewhere, we try to bring like little bits and pieces with us in case you were ever out and you can encounter something, you can give something to leave behind as a memory for them.
Give me something, like what?
Like for example, like our culture, as you know, playing Gaelic games, like sometimes it's bringing a jersey or a scarf for us, or like magnets or stickers. And if you go into a pub or a restaurant or you meet a sportsman, for us, like that's kind of a thing, I'll keep it in the rental car with me and go, I have something for you. And maybe it's like a jersey or a scarf and can be left behind, right? So something that would be meaningful to you, because one of the things that they look for in the culture is like trading those things that are meaningful. So like that gives great power to those people in the receiving the gift. So think about something that you might bring. And I know that you have your, you do your work with your bracelets and your mementos and your inspirational stuff.
That's a good idea.
So it could be something you bring with you and a great way to trade gifts. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Wow. Thank you. That's really good insight.
There you go. So speaking of insights, we're going to jump into correspondence. But if you have any tips for traveling or anything that you like to do, or you got any ideas for Jen to bring with her on a trip, let us know. Let's dive into correspondence. We got a ton of correspondence. Last episode that went out was on regret. But if you have any thoughts or ideas about any of the episodes you've gone back and listened to, sometimes you get some comments on previous episodes. We'd love to hear. Go back, start at 1 and catch up with us. I'm going to kick things off, Jen. So we had Dennis House on for an interview. I had a chance to sit down with Dennis, and Dennis is awesome. And Amy chimed in, and this is probably the sentiment that many people around Connecticut had if they listened to the episode was, quote, "It's so nice to see people like Dennis in a more personal fashion. I've been watching him report since I can remember, and I loved hearing more about his personal journey." One of the things that stood out to me I loved about Dennis was like, telling the story of him and his wife and how they've grown together in their journey and being able to work together and to manage their professional career, manage their personal career was really cool. So shout out to Dennis and Amy. Thank you for chiming in as well.
Yeah, and we received an email from Andre. He said, "Hi, Rory and Jen. Your episode on regret got me thinking about my education path. I sometimes wonder if I should have studied something more practical instead of following my passion. It's not that I regret my degree, but I do wonder how my career would look if I chosen differently. What's your take on educational regret? Is it common? And how do you make peace with these kinds of what ifs?"
Oof. Do you have
I talked about education in that episode, right, as being one of my regrets. And I think when I had phrased it around learning and whether or not I took it seriously. And I think that's that pivotal moment in high school and transition to college when you're really trying to choose your path forward. It's almost like you're choosing your destiny for the rest of your life. What are you going to pursue? What's your career goals? And I truly didn't know at that time. And I think just being so open and willing to learn and try different classes, try different experiences, and maybe not even just in the classroom, but what are you doing outside of the classroom to engage and to enlighten yourself to learn? I think that there is a basis of education. I think we teach this through like a liberal arts experience where you're a balanced, a holistic individual.
Yep.
You're not necessarily supposed to come out with every piece of information and wisdom you'll ever need for the rest of your life, but we're creating a foundation to be a critical thinker, to be able to analyze, to be emotionally intelligent, to build connections and relationships, speak eloquently, or to some extent be able to articulate your thoughts. That's what you spend a lot of your time with your students doing.
Yep.
If you get a basis of education, if you get a good foundation, I don't know that what your bachelor's degree is in matters all that much, because you can always go on and get a master's degree, right?
Sure.
You can always go on and find this other career and to pivot. So I feel you, Andre. Like I hear that point, but I don't know that it matters so much on the framework of what that bachelor's degree, the title of your degree is. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I'm finishing up year 19 and I'm ready to roll into 20 years.
How could you be 20 years if you're only 29?
Yeah, I know. It's great.
Started college young.
And one of the things that has changed for me over those 20 years spending time in higher education is how I think about education.
Yeah.
And the advice that I try to give to anybody, whether in my class or on the street or somebody that asks, or even when I have conversations, is as simple as do what you're good at. And I think a lot of times when you're a young person, what you're good at probably doesn't command a high dollar value. Yeah. And that provokes a lot of anxiety, right? So you're thinking, hey, I'm really good at this skill, but I'm looking at it and I can only make $20 an hour doing that skill. Well, here's my philosophy on it, right? Education or not, if you do what you're good at and you try or strive to become great at it, if you're really great at your thing, ultimately, you will command the relative wealth that you need to find contentment. And so that's my strategy on it. So if at the time, Andre, you pursued that journey and you were great at what you studied, then that was, in my opinion, that was a great decision. And I just think it's like, how do you balance this juxtaposition when you look out in the world today and you're surrounded by social media and you see all the things that you don't have, and where do you find gratitude in all the things that you do have? I just tell people, hey, if you're really, really good at something, that's your calling. Go pursue your purpose. Because if you show up to work every day happy, motivated, you're going to have lots of friends and people are going to pick you for your team.
I think we might need to do a whole episode on this because I bet you there's people listening right now that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s that are like, what am I actually good at?
Sure.
Right? So how do you identify that at 16, 17, 18 years old? So maybe we'll have to talk about that.
Okay, cool. I like that. Thanks, Andre. And the last one is an email from Caitlin. Hi, Rory and Jen. I'd love your take on this. How do you know when to keep pushing through a tough phase in your business versus when it's time to pivot or walk away? I hear a lot about grit and sticking with it, but also not wasting time on something that's not working. How do you personally make that call? That is a very thought-provoking question, Caitlin, and one that we actually spend a lot of time here in the center. Jen, quickly, do you have an immediate reaction or thought for Caitlin? How do you make that decision? Because that might be a whole nother episode too.
It surely is. I think that, yes, there is a balance between saying, I'm going to just keep going because I want to persevere. I want to show that I can do this, and knowing when enough is enough. And we always talk about self-awareness and being really in tune with who you are. You know in your gut if something is working or not, versus you being fearful about letting something go or afraid of failure and wrapping that up. You just need to sit in yourself and say, what do I value? Is this truly doing what I set out to do? And knowing when it's time to unwind and let that whatever that thing is, go.
Yeah, let it go. My gut reaction, Kaylin, is if you're going to persevere for you, because it has meaning or value to you, then keep working. Yeah. But if you're doing it for somebody else's approval, true. Let it go. Yep. Right. Speaking of you, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts, please send us an email, Collaboratory@uconn.edu. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok. Our YouTube channel is UConn CCEI. Send in your thoughts, comments, or questions. We would love to feature your contributions in our next episode.
Guess what just happened?
No way, you're kidding me.
Hey, did you hear about...
Are you sure about that? I can't believe they... Really?
It's time for Timely Topics.
Culture in the workplace is fundamentally different from the culture we experience in our personal lives. But recognizing this distinction is essential for enhancing performance and behavior within your organization. A strong workplace culture can lead to improved collaboration, increased engagement, and higher productivity. But unfortunately, culture can change without warning, especially in cases where individuals choose not to conform to the culture as it exists, which may change the culture forever. Join Jen and I as we engage this conversation through an organizational and management lens. Our Timely Topics theme this episode is culture, and as we were preparing for the episode, I said to Jen, in my opinion, culture is the most important element in an organization. And one of the things that stands out to me is in business, it feels so much more fickle, so much more fragile than it does in other parts of our lives, right? We come from traditions or cultures that you're born into, like you feel like those are inherent. But when it comes to business, it feels like it's something you've got to manufacture and create and try to sustain, and it's really hard. What do you think, Jen?
Yeah, I love the conversation around culture. It's something that we talk about, I think, all the time here in the center. It's something that we help entrepreneurs think about, because how cool is it to be able to start a business from scratch and create company culture from the ground up? Mm-hmm. But what I think is really interesting is you don't have company culture when you're a team of one, a team of two, right? So what is that in that space, and what are you creating out of nothing? It's going back to the individual. One of the things I love that we do is we're training individuals to be leaders. We are not just teaching them how to start a business, we're teaching them how to operate and run one. And one of the baselines, the key elements of a business is your people. Mm-hmm. And if you do not connect in with yourself, become really self-aware and understanding what you value as an individual, there is no ability to build a culture from scratch, because by the time you realize that, you're 30, 40, 50 team members in, and you go, oh, wait, we probably need to start thinking about this thing.
Yeah, you know what stands out to me is not just necessarily for the employees, because that's what we're going to spend a good bit of today talking about, is that internal culture. For me, one of the things that manifest over time doing the training and development work was recognizing that a part of your culture is who you work with and who your clients are, who your customers are. And so, of course, we talk about customer discovery. So if you're starting or launching a business, who do you want to sell to? And I think a lot of the times when I look at some of the programming that exists out there, they're just trying to make a profit, right? You're trying to drive revenue. And I've always really found myself, especially doing consulting work, trying to talk to any of my peers, anybody who's in the coaching space, to say, who do you want to work with, right? Mm. Because they're going to impact you in significant ways. And for me, who you work with, both next to you as a colleague, but across the aisle, across the table as a customer, that has just as much impact on your culture. And you've got to be able to figure out who do you want to take money from, who do you want to do business with, and who would you rather say, I'm all set, right? Because that's not part of our culture. That's not what we stand for. That's not the direction we want to go. And figuring those things out early days can have a huge influence on your ability to scale in a way that you want to.
And I'm over here nodding because choosing the wrong customer, and this is, a B2B conversation, right? But choosing the wrong customer that can impact your employees, your employee morale, their ability to work with them, choosing them over your employees sometimes, like profit over people. Yep. We hear that more as like a short-term goal. It's easier to try to get the wins, get the dollars in the door. But if you don't focus on your employees first, the long-term profitability, the long-term success of the company is really what is up for some really negative situations. So I've seen it firsthand in organizations that you might be doing case studies with or working directly alongside. They're going well. They're focused on culture. They're driven by their values. Private equity comes in, dumps a lot of money and says, we're going to grow. We're going to go buy and scale. And all of a sudden now the board's dictating who works there. Yeah. Wait a minute, I thought we were driven by a culture of values. I thought we were following this system that allowed us to get to the point we are. But now all of a sudden, right, profit over people says, we don't think you're the right fit anymore. Well, who gets to dictate that? Somebody that just showed up to culture. And one of the things that I think is exciting for us in the early stages of entrepreneurs is getting the chance to create it and really dictate. But
Sustaining culture to me is where you become an artist, is where you really get to showcase your ability. If you're a leader, if you're an owner, if you're a founder, if you're a manager, and you have a great culture and you can sustain it day after day, year after year, you're special. Write the book, share the secrets, because it is difficult. When somebody shows up to your culture and they decide that they're not going to conform to the way it existed, you've got a challenge. Now, maybe it's a good thing, right? Maybe they bring ingenuity and innovation and new ways of thinking, and the culture is comfortable with that. But if the culture's not comfortable with it, or they don't appreciate the lack of conformity, you instantly have a pretty significant challenge on your hands.
Yeah, and we talk about books all the time, and we've talked about the culture code between the two of us. And one of the quotes, I was just trying to dig it up, that I thought was really interesting is, the leaders of great teams are not chess masters, they're gardeners. They don't act like strategists dictating moves. They create conditions for growth. And I love that, of cultivating a garden, and you think about the love, the energy, the sunlight, the water that you give to your little flowers, your team. You're there to serve them. They're not there to serve you. And when you think as a leader in that mindset, you're cultivating an organization that can withstand trials, tribulations, good times, bad times, when you're looking at things from a different perspective. Overly strategy focused and not people oriented, I think, is when you can't overcome the changing.
I'm going to challenge this a little bit, right? Just like in a garden, you plant some things once in a while, for whatever reason, they don't grow, right? And the one right next to it, the exact same packet of seeds, same sun, same water, same songs.
Yeah.
One of them doesn't grow. Sometimes that happens, right? And that can be the case. The other thing too is is the leader really cognizant of the resources that they have available to them? How much sunlight are we getting, right? And in the organization, what types of people do we need to recruit and retain that are a good fit for the culture that you want to create? It's very difficult. And this is why I love this conversation, because you're saying that they should be a strategist, right? But I wonder, then who gets to dictate, right? Then who's in control? Does there need to be someone in control? Is it possible? Can culture be controlled, right? There's a conversation in and of itself. And so when we think about the cultures that we inherit, the ones that we grow up in, the cultures that, we were talking about travel early in the episode, the cultures that you go be a part of, where do they get created and how do they get sustained? But in a business, how influential just one change can have on the entire culture. And I wanted to dive into a topic in regards to like culture in the modern era, the post-COVID work era, and thinking a little bit about how have we seen culture change in workplaces, since this significant disruption of the way that we thought things were always going to be.
I'm going to, as you're going through all these points, in my mind, I'm just like stacking these responses back to you. So I'm going to go back to your flowers for a second, because so we have in our garden, right, the flower that's blooming and thriving and you're giving it all the things. And the one next to it, it's like not so happy. That's more of what my garden looks like all the time. Actually, I'm not really great at taking care of plants. But what is our instinct? It's to continue to water and continue to care for the ones that are drooping. And what does that do? It takes away energy and resources from the ones that are shining. And I think as a leader, you really need to understand, are you creating an environment that is allowing people to thrive, or is truly the people that are not thriving in an environment that is just not good for them? And your job as a leader is to accept that person's not in the right role and figure out where in the organization they can move to, or create an opportunity for them to propel up and out of the organization into another position. But I think truly a leader really needs to be mindful of each individual and giving them the chance to flourish. So that was one point that I wanted to go off of. And you're talking about cultivating culture in the modern era. So thinking about balancing like the wide and vast array of individuals we have at various ages in the workplace right now, and the dynamics of how they've grown up in work environments. Like what, we've talked about this before, you and I, and those that are in our age range, what types of jobs we had as a teenager and what that equipped us to be able to do in the workplace versus maybe what some of our colleagues that are a bit younger are coming into the workforce experiencing or not experiencing.
Yeah. It makes you wonder. I was talking a little bit about who's in control of culture or where it gets dictated from. We talk about our entrepreneurs, and we would say to our entrepreneurs, you should write it down and then try to manifest it every day, and then maybe you come back and revisit it. When you think about organizations that have been sustained for a long period of time, right? When you look at organizations you come into as a manager leader, and you look at many of the great CEOs of the last decade or two, and we'll get into a few of those highlights in a moment, where they're coming in, they're inheriting culture. they're trying to change culture, how much of it needs to be explicit? So when we talk about managing culture in the modern era, and you use the word I wanted to get into is individualism. So we celebrate individualism. Why? Because, well, we live in an era where you can, right? And I introduced another word earlier, which was conformity. So where's the balance, right? If you want to be part of a culture that celebrates individualism, does there actually need to be any level of conformity to the culture and to what they have? And I'm gonna give you a thought here from our friend Jim Collins and Good to Great Built to Last. Loves to talk about the bus. And Jim says, if you're gonna lead a team, you got to get yourself a bus. And the most important thing is who you get on the bus or who you get off the bus. And, sometimes Jim will say a smaller bus is a lot easier to manage, right? When the organization gets bigger, it gets tougher because you got more of that individualism. So let me pose that question to you, Jen. Is culture in an organization, especially one that is not new, especially one for our listeners out there that are trying to sustain culture in organizations that they've been a part of for a long time, maybe they've been promoted, maybe they're a manager, maybe they're coming into a new organization as a leader. Should they be explicit with the culture? Should it be written down? Should it be something that exists? Or do you let the individuals kind of drive and dictate the culture? And, well, is there any risk to that?
Yes. To all of those things on both sides of the fence. I think it's really, really difficult because we want to create an environment where people can thrive, and everybody's desires, experiences, comforts in a workplace are different. So, we talk about this all the time with this work from home concept. Some people thrive in that environment where they can go to their desk at the time that works most best for them to get their job done, and they're not bothered by individuals. Yes, they get the pings, the phone calls, and the emails, but they are ultimately in a space that they can be creative, for example, versus the companies now that are going back to being in the office, or the ones that have very strict, you work 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, and it's very explicit timeframes. Well, how does that impact the people on your team that are better from 3 to 5? They're most creative from 7 to 8 p.m. Are we changing our environment to fit the individual? Are we trying to maximize the most out of the members of our team? How do we balance what's best for all to enhance and create the highest performers out of the individual? And I think that's what you're asking me, but those are questions that you have to think about. Because I also think sometimes leaders are afraid to make decisions that are so give everyone autonomy, because it makes people feel like, oh, this person's getting special treatment, or that your organization's not being really firm with their policy. What is it? Is it following a rule because there's a rule and it makes everyone feel comfortable that everyone gets this fair and equal treatment? Or is there flexibility to get the most out of your employees? And what matters more?
This is a tough debate because when you think about how culture's traditionally defined, it's shared through sets of norms, through expectations, and a word that I think stands out for many of us is this idea of traditions, right? And the tradition might just be how the workday goes, and it applies to, you can be working in construction, you can be working in the office, right? There are workday traditions that you go through. When we place autonomy, individualism, and I love that you presented it as, is it seen as being favorable, or are you taking advantage of that person's skill sets? I can keep thinking about a team mentality, and part of being a part of a team is sharing the traditions. The UConn women's basketball team, when they were interviewed post-championship, there's been conversation about we're really close, we've got really good culture and there's really strong friendships. Well, it goes to show you, right, that they recognize that if you have one teammate, it just takes one teammate that doesn't conform or doesn't feel like they're in line with the culture, it can shift the whole thing. And I think when you see teams have great success, you probably could go back and ask, I think on a lot of occasions, they knew that there was greatness, whether it be in the locker room, whether it be in the boardroom, whether it be out on the job site. There was a sense of we're in this together. And to your point, and this is the challenge that I think we're facing in the modern era, is you have generational gaps in norms, right? Especially for communication channels. You have shifts in what traditions might look like in the workplace, right? We talked about a third of Americans used to start their careers in the hospitality industry. That number is going down by the day. So you're not having maybe some of these retail-like experiences early in your career, which is where you learn some of those traditions. Now you show up in the workplace and you don't have some of those traditions, and folks who have managed for many years are thinking, well, this is how we do things. So these cultures of innovations that we're facing, they are going to be challenged, because at the end of the day, I think you and I are in agreement on the one thing, is that when you have great team cohesion, you can do anything, right? It's probably one of the most, in my opinion, the most powerful thing you can have in an organization.
Do you think there's a space for microcultures in organizations where you have, so think about an organization that has 3,000 employees, 10,000 employees. Having an organizational culture to me feels like we have a set of rules. We hopefully instill those rules in our mid-level managers so that they instill them in their employees. But what is the value of these microcultures within the organization that allows for those individual teams to thrive and create environments where, okay, I'm working with these 30 individuals and I know that this is how we operate and this is how we show each other trust and how we collaborate and communicate and all of those really essential pieces of being a part of a team.
I'm going to actually pull in a quote here. Abigail did some great research for the episode for us. Satya Nadella from Microsoft, quote, "Our industry does not respect tradition. It only respects innovation. But innovation is born from a culture of continuous learning." Okay, Jen, let's come back to your question now for a moment. And that is that, can you have silos of culture? Yeah. One of the things that's been a particularly fun challenge for me to work with organizations from a training and development standpoint are these silos. And I've worked with organizations, engineering, manufacturing space, for example, where one of the silos is built around a culture of innovation, right? Break things, put them back together. And then you have other silos, operations, right, that are going, guys, this doesn't really work for us. Like, you can't just have this culture of innovation over here because we are literally trying to come up with operations to allow this to work in a way that's effective. So I don't know. To me, I look at it, my answer would be holistic. Mm-hmm. I think the entire organization does have to be under one culture. And as it gets bigger, it becomes really, really challenging. And so it brings us maybe to kind of a pragmatic side of the conversation for our listeners who are saying, geez, this is really important, but where do I go and what do I do? Yeah. So some of the kind of takeaway questions that we wanted to leave, and Jen, maybe we can kind of have a second to debate this, is when you see culture starting to change, you're an individual in the organization, maybe you're the founder of the organization, right? But you see culture shifting, and maybe you don't really love the direction it's going. What do, right? Do you try and control it? Do you try to fix it? Can you fix it? Can you change it? Any recommendations, strategies, thoughts on how you can, as an individual, influence organizational culture?
So as someone who's not in a large and influential role within an organization?
Either way.
Okay.
Either way.
I think
just an individual.
Okay, so as an individual contributor on a team, I think you can create culture by the relationships that you're building with the members of the team. And I think it does start from a microculture standpoint. I think other members of the organization that look into internal teams and go, that one's really well functioning. Like that one, they get the job done, or they do things really effectively, or they're really, really great at that specific project that they worked on. How did they get there? So using almost like use cases within the organization of like, wow, this one's a really good example of this. How can we take this and transform other parts of the organization with that? I think top down, starting to think about a transformation in your HR department and how to formulate, strategy through the lens of culture from heads of people, and changing the way we think about HR and that dynamic of being the place that just takes in performance evaluations and hires and fires people, but are they your transformation people? Are they the one that has their ear to the ground and hearing what your CEOs and other members of the C-suite really need to hear, what's happening internally?
Yeah, there's so much to think about on this topic. And as we look to wrap things up, I think we turn it over to our listeners and ask you, what do you love about your workplace culture? What are the things that have kept you around for a really long time? Or in this modern era, and what we talk about as the post-COVID workplaces, what are some things that you feel like have shifted significantly in culture? And what would you like to see change? What would the influences be that you might bring in if you had the opportunity to shift culture? Let us know. We definitely will continue this conversation down the road.
Good idea.
Bad idea.
All right, so to stay on theme with this episode's topic of culture, I wanted to position this good idea, bad idea topic around the very vocal and prominent company cultures that we often hear about. Okay. So for example, Netflix and the freedom and responsibility culture. So they're known for having a very autonomous culture, but balance that with very high expectations around employee performance. So their culture is so widely shared that Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, even wrote a book about it called No Rules Rules.
Nice.
So this brings me to the question. Do you think it's a good idea or bad idea for company culture to be so visible and broadly understood outside of the organization?
This is interesting for me. I actually was not familiar with the Netflix culture. And so, you were just giving me a real quick briefing on it. My answer to that question is unequivocally yes. I believe it is a great idea for organizations to make their culture clear, transparent, and aware to anybody that has interest in it. And my reasoning for that is from a recruitment standpoint, whether it be employees or customers. I think that knowing what a company stands for up front allows everybody involved to have clear expectations going into it. If it's a company that fits your values and you like the idea of that culture, then show up every day and participate. And in some regards, in my opinion, like conform to the culture, like be a part of it. You knew going in. Same for customers or clients. I think my only important note or caveat on this is that if you're going to be that explicit about it, if the world's going to know what your culture is, you dang well better live by it, right? Because if you don't, your credibility in the marketplace is shot. But I love it. I think it applies. I'll just say one other thing. I don't think it's limited to just businesses. I really think it's important for nonprofits. I think it's important for philanthropic groups. I think it's important for your neighborhood ball clubs to say this is our culture. Because one of the things that I've had a great experience over the last several years with Mairead being involved in sports is you go to different teams, you go to different communities, you see what the culture is, and it allows you as a consumer to say, does this culture fit the way that we think about, this athletic adventure or this business transaction? And by being upfront, I think it makes it easier for everybody involved.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
What do you think?
Yeah, I generally like the concept of companies explicitly saying this is our culture, this is how we treat our employees, and this is ultimately how we hope our employees will treat our customers. I think that's a great strategy to bring in new customers. It's a great strategy for getting the right people in the door. And I know a lot of companies nowadays are saying up front, hey, this is what it's like to work here.
Yeah.
And some of them are really explicit up front. It's actually, it's not going to be easy. You're going to be putting in long days. We expect a lot out of you, but we promise in the return, we're going to treat you really well. Either we pay,
Yep.
a little bit more highly, or you get a larger cut with stocks and other options. But I just don't like the vanity cultures that are put out there that we talk all about doing these things just as a mechanism to generate revenue, and we don't actually do the things, or we say we do them, but then there's but not in this case, right? And it's the consistency and the alignment of the values thing that's really important to me.
Yeah, it just feels like too, like we're in this constant question of authenticity,
Yeah.
right? It's such a word. I talk about this with our students all the time. Authenticity wasn't a word that we were using all that much 25 years ago. It just wasn't a thing. Like you just were what you were. And now with the ability, no barriers to entry in the marketplace, you can put out lots of content, you can showcase anything you want. We're kind of questioning, is that a real authentic culture, or is that just something you're telling us?
Yep.
Let us know. Folks, that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to share this episode and all of our previous episodes with your friends, or drop us an idea for a future episode topic or guest.
And don't forget, we produce our show right here in the Collaboratory studio at CCEI in the heart of downtown Hartford.
So until next time, we're wishing you good luck in all your endeavors.